Hello and welcome to the F1 Time Portal, a Formula One history podcast started by two Formula One fans. I'm your host, Rosa.
And to commemorate 1960, I'm your hippie host, Luigi. And today we're taking you back to the 1960 season. So let's go. So we're into the 60s, Rosa. How does it feel?
I know, it feels so quick.
I know.
Yeah, we've zipped through the 50s and now we're into the 60s. It's exciting for me.
It is. And I guess before we start, I was going to ask you, what's your perception of the 60s before we get into it? Because I've got some perceptions before we start. What's yours? Yeah.
Well, having done a little bit more research of the 60s, I think they were still really dangerous. Like, I think cars were getting faster and faster and lighter, but safety was still not anywhere in anyone's really at the forefront of anyone's mind yet. Also the 60s were like huge technological changes were happening, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the cars look dramatically different. They're like little toothpaste tubes, and they're like the joke is that they look like coffins.
Okay.
And you're driving high-speed coffins, and to me, this is when there's drivers that I sort of relate to a little bit more. They seem a little bit more real to me.
Yes,
I don't know why that's the case, because the 50s and 60s is not that different. But Jim Clark, Jackie Stewart, Jack Brabham, Graham Hill. There's so many big names in the 60s that still resonate today. So people talk about their love of Senna and Prost and all that sort of thing, but people still talk about Clark and Stewart, but mainly Clark in that special way. But they don't talk about the 50s drivers as much.
No.
Like that.
I think, isn't it also because, I don't know, a lot of the drivers in the 60s went on to do something with Formula One, like Jackie Stewart, he did a lot in the 70s, and didn't he even run a team in the late 90s?
Yeah, Stewart Racing, which became Jaguar, which became Red Bull.
That's right. So you kind of remember these names because their careers in the sport went for longer. Whereas, once Fangio left, he really had nothing to do, really. Well, not that I've read, with the ongoing sport. And same even with Brabham. I think his name was sort of linked with Formula One for some time after he stopped racing.
I think you've tapped into something that you've made me realize. I think it's because the media changed. Because, for example, suddenly there was TV, and you had commentators, and you had people that interviewed other people, but there was TV as a platform upon which it got out.
Yes.
Whereas in the 50s, that was absent.
So that's right.
We have a less of a connection.
Yep. I agree.
Having said that, I haven't seen many interviews with Jim Clark, for example.
No, well, the opportunity was kind of robbed for that, I think.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think they're a little bit more kind of relatable this era, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, shall we get into 1960 then?
Yep, let's do it.
Okay. So there's a lot to look forward to in this era, with quite a few teams entering the sport, some surviving and some not. Of some huge technical changes that took place, especially introduced by a certain Colin Chapman, and that would have a massive impact on the sport going forward.
Yeah, and we're also going to see, like you said, we're going to see some big names entering the paddock, people that we've heard about. So it's going to be a lot more relatable this era.
Yeah, that's right. So not that we were alive in the 60s, but I hope we don't sound that old. But the names are more familiar, and we hear about them a bit more nowadays. So, yeah. So we left 59 with the rear-engine Coopers making their mark on the field, winning both the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship. There was some surprising news for the 1960 season, though. So unlike other Formula One teams that had a habit of leaving F1 after winning, which, if you think of Alfa Romeo, Mercedes, Van Wall, I'm glad to say that Cooper actually stayed on.
Yay!
So their cars were virtually unchanged, other than some rear suspension modifications and a new 5-speed gearbox.
Yeah, and they stuck with their champion driver Brabham as well as McLaren. I think that's the exact same team as last year.
Yeah, and teams that stay together and have this consistency really do a lot better, don't they?
Yeah,
You know? Yeah. So the Cooper was a popular make of chassis, and this marked the first Ferrari engined Cooper driven by a team called Scuderia Eugenio Castellotti in memory of the actual late Italian driver.
Oh, that's a nice touch. It is a bit weird though, with it being a British chassis, but that is nice that they named it after him. Was it a revolutionary rear-engined car, Luigi?
It wasn't, but it was just a modified Ferrari with a different engine. But Ferrari had now developed their own rear-engined version car, building a short, compact version which saved weight and reduced frontal area. But it was basically a bit of an unusual mishmash car, that one. But the only reason we're mentioning it is because it's pretty funny.
Yeah, it is funny.
But let me clarify. That was that's the Castellotti car, but Ferrari, the team itself, persevered with their front engine car. So they were sticking to their guns. Remember, in 1959, one of the races where Ferrari got 1-2, and I said that's a bad result because that's going to galvanise Enzo's position as must be front engined. So because he thought they were more reliable than the rear engined cars.
Yeah. Okay.
So Colin Chapman and his team, his Lotus team, also built a new rear-engined car called the Lotus 18, and this car had an even slighter profile as he was the first to position the driver to be as close as possible to lying down rather than sitting in the traditional upright position. So this is one of the first times we see a car really leveraging that low-profile position. So very innovative.
It is, and kind of, I think it gets even to more of a lying down position, but it's similar to what we have now in racing.
Correct.
In Formula One. Yeah. So 1960. Wow.
Correct. So needless to say, Colin Chapman and Lotus had some success with this, with his team taking the first of a long line of race wins in 1960. So finally, Lotus break through for a win this year. Yeah. Which race will it be? You will find out.
Yeah. I think it also helped that they signed what would become two massive names and champions of the sport in Jim Clark and John Surtees. And they have a massive rivalry all the way through the 60s, these two drivers. So, John Surtees was already a champion. He was coming off of 3 500cc motorcycle world championships. And I think he also wins one while he's also competing in F1.
That's that's a spoiler. So maybe Rosa.
We don't know which year. Yeah. So he actually
you don't know which year.
No, I don't. No, I don't. So he made his debut in Formula Junior for Ken Tyrrell's team, weirdly, and he took pole and came second to Jim Clark. And Colin Chapman noticed and signed him to his F2 team. And 10 weeks later, he's racing in F1.
There you go. That's the first time we've heard of a driver development program.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yes.
It's a 10-week turnaround program. It's a 2.5-month program.
Yeah, it's pretty quick.
And I mean, essentially, he had the right stuff to take on Formula One, being a racer.
Yeah.
Being a champion in two wheels meant he had good skills, good intuition. And to be completely honest, the drivers of two-wheeled cars, they're more braver than the ones driving four-wheeled cars.
Two-wheeled cars? You mean motorcycles?
I mean motorcycles.
Everything's a car to you, Luigi.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim Clark, I mean, he is often mentioned in the debate on the greatest driver of all time. Like anytime, you have those debates about who's the best driver, you get Fangio, Senna, Prost, Schumacher, Hamilton, and someone always mentions Jim Clark in that conversation. So, it's going to be a really interesting season.
And for very good reason. It's a real pity about Clark, and we don't want to give anything away then. It's a long time, so let's not talk about it anymore.
No, let's not.
Yeah. So very good company in that Lotus team and an amazing combination. So no surprise that they won their first race with that talent at their disposal. So at BRM, there were only minor changes to their rear-engine car, and the other British team, Aston Martin, continued to race their DBR 4/250S. Despite also producing a new car during the year, the team continued to have limited success and later in the year withdrew from Formula One. So, shall I make an inappropriate comment about nowadays Aston Martin, or shall I just...
No, let's not make any inappropriate comments. But
Okay.
it's a bit sad. I mean, all these teams, they come and they go, and like at least, you know, when Alfa and Mercedes left, they were dominating. They left on a high.
Yeah.
Aston didn't do anything, and they've gone.
And you know what the thing is? I hate to say it, but when Aston Martin returned to Formula One a few years ago under the oversight of Lawrence Stroll, it was like, oh, we've been in Formula One before. They did sort of stuff all. They did really stuff all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
I know.
so it's a little bit exaggeration is what I'd say.
Yeah. And and Graham Hill's driving for them this year, isn't he?
Yeah, let me have a look. Give me a second.
I think he is. So, I don't know.
The reason why I can't tell, and you're going to love the reason.
Oh, no.
I'm looking at the points table from 1960, and I thought, oh, yeah, I'll just see Aston. No, they don't get any points. So there's nothing for me to look at to double check.
Oh, gosh.
I see Graham Hill drove for BRM, so it wasn't Aston Martin.
Wasn't.
So,
no.
yeah, let's just put that to bed.
Good.
Okay, so there was a new point scoring system that changed this year, with actually a point for the fastest lap being dropped and a point given for sixth place.
Well, so that's interesting.
And you know, that stayed till the 80s or something, or the 90s, actually. So that lasted a long, like the top six getting points.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And when does the fastest lap come back? Because we've got that now. So
that was a recent thing. That was the last 5 years, maybe.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, isn't it interesting?
Yeah, okay.
So there's 9 races this season, with the best 6 scores counting towards the championship. So that increased from 5 the previous season. So that's not a major change, but it's enough of a change. So there's only 3 races that don't count. Okay. Now, considering how many gearbox problems this era has, they could probably make that there's 4 results counts, and it wouldn't change the results. So the calendar this season goes to 9 races, and the last race, this is the last year that we have to deal with that thing we don't talk about.
Okay. Yes, you are a bit of a Formula One snob when it comes to that race, Luigi.
We're going to get so much heat for this.
I know.
And
some people love that race. Like, some people think that's the best race in the world ever.
And there's nothing wrong with that race. It's
it's not part of Formula One.
Different rules, different drivers.
Yeah.
Sometimes clashed with an actual F1 race. So really, it's a bit of a joke, to be honest.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the race is a joke, just the fact
that it was part of F1. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So shall we move on to the first race?
Let's do it.
So we start with the Argentinian Grand Prix, the first race of 1960. This time it started later in the year, February the 7th. Normally it's like bang on Jan 1 or something.
Yes.
So they decided to give themselves a break, so good on them. The track was Buenos Aires, 80 laps, 22 drivers, and the grid formation was a 4x3x3 only. Now, the reason why I say 4x3x3 is because only 10 drivers actually turned up. So, yeah.
Okay.
It's not normally out of pattern numerical sequence, you know. So the Argentinian race is back since the 1959 cancellation. But this is 1960. Oh, it was cancelled in 59.
It was cancelled in 59. Yeah.
Okay. So most of the teams were virtually unchanged, except that Graham Hill was driving for the first time with BRM. Lotus revealed their new rear-engined Lotus for Innes Island. I wonder if it's pronounced Innes.
I think it's Innes. I would say Innes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll try to remember that. Otherwise, I'll just call them Island. And this combination looked very strong. And to Moss, this was his biggest concern in terms of this competitive situation on the track.
Right.
However, Moss still secured a very strong pole position in his old Lotus with 1 minute 36.9, followed by Ireland, 1 minute 38.5, then Hill in the BRM, that's G Hill, and Bonnier in the BRM in fourth. And then the Ferrari pair of Von Trips and Phil Hill were next. The defending champion, Jack Brabham, actually had a poor qualifying and finished 11th. Not only that, of the Cooper climaxes that were in this race, he was the fourth fastest. So really, he did not have a good qualifying session.
Yeah, what happened to him? He was just, was it like the World Championship hangover? He was just...
Who knows?
Yeah, he just didn't come ready. He wasn't ready.
Yeah. So come race day, Moss's concerns about Ireland came alive as Ireland made one of the best ever race starts, apparently according to Mike Lang, and he led the first 2 laps. So that's pretty impressive.
It's pretty impressive, yep.
For those of you that know about the TP Championship that we also have as a side
series
episode, that means he's guaranteed top 3 position already, regardless of what happens.
Definitely
from this
by
point.
you, definitely
by
from
me.
you.
Yeah. However, on the 5th lap, on the 3rd lap, he appeared 5th as he had spun on some oil. So the race order was now Bonnier, so not even Moss in the lead, Graham Hill, Moss, Brabham, so Brabham's up there, Ireland, Phil Hill, and McLaren was down in 11th place.
That's pretty impressive. You said Brabham qualified 11th and he's now up in 4th. And why are we've gone all the way down to 11th place? Why are we mentioning McLaren in 11th?
Yeah, you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, the story unfolds.
Oh gosh. Okay.
We only mention things when it's
exciting.
Yeah, when something interesting happens, right?
Okay.
So Moss, however, was not to stay 3rd for long, and by lap 14, Moss had taken the lead, and Ireland had moved into 3rd place, having passed Brabham and Graham Hill. The race day was actually very hot, and the effect of the heat was actually starting to impact the drivers.
It is always so hot for this race. Like maybe they should move it to another month. I know they've moved it to February this time, but it's always in the dead of summer.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. But I think they always gap this race. There's always like a 3 or 4 month gap to the next race because of the cars having to travel by ship.
Okay,
you know?
Yeah,
so
fair enough.
They probably don't have much choice.
Okay.
So anyway, this is actually the last race for Argentina until 1972. So let's embrace and enjoy this. So maybe this heat concern of yours is less of an issue.
Okay.
Mainly due to the government unrest after the exile of President Perón until his death.
So he was the motorsport fan, and then when he wasn't there, they didn't want it.
Something like that.
It probably is a lot deeper than that, Luigi. It probably has a lot more political undertones. But
we should get Nacho back for this episode to explain why did Formula One disappear for 12 years from Argentina. So back to the race, Scarlatti retired on lap 11, and by lap 20, 3 other drivers pulled into the pits suffering from heat exhaustion. So the heat really was significant. In the meantime, Moss and Bonnier were pushing hard, and they were extremely close up front. At half distance, the whole pattern of the race changed because Graham Hill retired with overheating of the car, I think.
I was going to say him or his car?
Yeah, I was thinking.
Both.
I was wondering, actually. And 3 laps later, Moss had to retire with a broken rear suspension. So the Moss gremlins still at it.
Gosh, this guy just can't take a trick.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
I know.
So this left Bonnier with a big lead over Ireland in 2nd place. However, before long, the Swedish driver, that's Bonnier, also suffered overheating, like his BRM teammate Graham Hill.
Okay. Well, they wouldn't have been used to the heat, would they? Someone from Sweden and someone from the US. So far, it's not a race; it's a retirement program.
Yeah, it is. And Graham Hill's not from the US; he's from.
From the UK. I meant the UK. Yeah. Yes, yes.
But Phil Hill is from the US.
Phil Hill is the US.
Let's just pretend that's what you meant. So yeah. So now Ireland went into the lead. But then on lap, so I feel like all I'm talking about is the retirements. This has to be a better race review than that. It's ridiculous. So now Ireland went into the lead, but then on lap 67, his engine had a misfire and he had to make a lengthy pit stop, which put him out of the running. In the meantime, McLaren
is back.
Yeah. Now you know why I mentioned it ages ago. McLaren had passed Mendy and Allison, who are like not main drivers, but they just happened to be in the way, and he suddenly found himself in the lead. So McLaren held this position until race end, with Allison coming second. Moss, in the meantime, had taken over Trintignant's car on lap 64, and with some forceful driving, had taken third place.
Yes, but remember, this rule was changed. So even though he drove Trintignant's car across the line for third place, he was not awarded any points for the place.
I don't understand how they even let you do it.
Like, I know.
Even with the points removal, I get that.
I get that too.
Why bother?
Yeah, why let him on the track? Like, he could have caused an accident with someone else. Like, something could have happened on track, and he could have actually changed the outcome of the race. He shouldn't have been out there. This is again the FIA just being maybe the B team FIA went to Argentina.
Well, actually, one thing I'd like to mention, and I read this in a Facebook post the other day. Apparently, and technically, the FIA doesn't exist apparently till 1981 because of some agreements in 19. So when we say FIA, we just mean
the governing body. I think
they were called, so don't jump down our throats.
No, don't. I think they actually have had lots of different names in this era. One of them was CSI, which I read about in 1963, I think. So yeah, but we just mean the governing body. But they just went on top of things as much, were they? Like, we've seen a lot of weird decisions and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I get why they allowed the drivers on, because it means strategically he can block someone else getting those points. But it's an unusual thing to allow for the risks that you were talking about.
But the fact that, he shouldn't have been allowed to do that, because he could have changed the outcome of the race by not actually being allowed to be on the track in someone else's car.
Yeah, agree.
I also have to mention at this point, I think, because we do like to commemorate drivers, but Shell, who I think was quite a big player in last season's championship, this would be his last F1 race. He qualified 10th in a Cooper and retired on lap 64. But in May, he is killed while practicing for the International Trophy race at Silverstone. So he was 38. He had driven in F1 from 1950 to 1960. And he'd entered 57 races. He'd earned 2 podiums, but he was always up there. Like, we were always talking about him in those late 50s years. Yeah,
we noticed him in the late 50s, especially when he did that big cheating move in the last race of 59. That was... Yeah. I mean, I don't remember him just for that.
No. He was always up there, though. He was pushing the leaders a lot. But I thought I'd just mention that because we do like to pay our respects to the drivers who we've talked about in the podcast.
Yeah, and 57 races is actually a lot of races for this era. So,
yeah.
So the final results of this race were McLaren wins in the Cooper Climax, followed by Allison in the Ferrari. Third came the Trintignant-Moss Cooper Climax no points pair.
Yes.
Mendy comes next in the Cooper Climax, and the rest.
Yeah, so the championship standings are, Bruce McLaren on 8, Cliff Allison on 6, and Mendy, as we call him, on 3 points.
Mendy, not Mendy.
Yeah, that was Mendy.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So, Cooper, in the constructors, it's Cooper on 8, Ferrari on 6. Oh, sorry, I have to say the full name because now we've got different engines, don't we? So we've got Cooper Climax on 8, Ferrari on 6, and Cooper Maserati on 3.
Don't worry, I don't think that Cooper Maserati is going to be
I don't think they do much more.
Okay, so like I said, there's always a big gap. So we're up to the second race of the year, Monaco Grand Prix, in the 29th of May. So 100 laps. There's 16 drivers in this race, but 24 attempt to qualify. So it's one of those pre-qualifying things again. And the grid formation is 3x2x3. And this just shows the Monaco width of track hasn't changed since those days because they can't, because it's a street circuit.
It's a street circuit, yeah.
It shows how much smaller these cars were, that it can be 3 wide.
Yes.
So just saying. So as this race was in late May versus the early Feb Argentinian race, most teams actually had new models, including Ferrari with its first rear-engined model.
Wow.
Making their debut was the Cooper Castellotti, which is the Cooper chassis with the 4-cylinder Ferrari Squalo engine.
Okay, and John Surtees is making his F1 debut in this race with the Lotus Climax.
Yeah, that's very exciting. We always like to make note of key drivers that are making their debuts. Again, Monaco was limiting their race to 16 cars, so 8 had to miss out. So there was a shambles of sorts during the opening afternoon practice, with there being a problem with the timing equipment. So this session was declared null and void, which, okay, I guess the cars had practice. So it took until Friday morning for a normal practice session to actually present itself.
Yes, and one of the things I did read about for this race was, again, just showing how dangerous Formula One was in this era, like we don't already know, but Allison in the Ferrari crashed heavily at one of the chicanes and was thrown from his car, his Ferrari. So, yeah, again, everyone thought it was safer to not be buckled or tied into the car. So, yeah, even in Monaco, which is a relatively slower track, big accidents can happen, and he suffered a broken arm and had other injuries as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad nothing else happened, but yeah, slowest track on the circuit and you can still be deadly. So Moss, meanwhile, claimed pole position in the race with a time of 1 minute 36.3, followed by Brabham exactly 1 second slower. So good qualifying by Brabham this time. Brooks made the front row in his Cooper, followed by Bristow and Bonnier. So at race start, Bonnier made a great start from 5th and snatched the lead with Brabham behind. It's pretty impressive for Monaco, I'd say. By lap 5, Moss had passed Brabham and sat on Bonnier's tail. Bonnier's brakes started to fade, and on lap 10, he waved Moss through. Moss, however, stayed right on Bonnier's tail, and a queue started forming.
What? Hang on. So he didn't, when Bonnier waved him through, he didn't pass him. He just stayed there. Why? Or was he trying to slipstream him? Like, I don't think Monaco was really a slipstreaming track.
No, he may have been wanting to preserve his tyres.
Yeah, maybe.
Who knows? Yeah, it was interesting. It might come out in the race proper.
Okay.
So finally on lap 17, Moss made his move and left Bonnier to battle it out for second place with Brabham, Phil Hill, Brooks, Graham Hill, Bristow and McLaren, who were all very close together. Then on lap 28, it started to rain.
Okay, well now we're going to see the great drivers as opposed to just good drivers.
Yeah, and especially on this track.
Yes.
So by this time, Moss had built up a 7-second lead, but with the circuit becoming ever more slippery, he began driving slower. So this allowed Brabham and Bonnier to start closing in on Moss. Then on lap 34, Brabham took the lead, but his car was jumping out of gear, and on lap 41, it caused him to lose control and hit a wall at Saint Devote. In the words of Mike Lang, he temporarily retired.
What is that mean? What is that? What does temporary mean? Like, that's a new terminology from our friend Mike Lang.
I know. Interesting, isn't it? So I think that might come out in the race.
Okay, all right. Keep going then.
So other drivers were also being caught out by this ever increasing slippery track, including Brooks and Phil Hill. So by half distance, Moss, who was in the lead again because Brabham had that temporary retirement issue, by half distance, Moss was still leading and had managed to increase his lead over Bonnier to 14 seconds, with McLaren third over a minute behind. So there are only 6 cars left.
What? You haven't mentioned any retirements this time.
You know, well, you're right. Remember the first race? All I did was talk about the retirement.
Yes.
I've decided, unless it really counts, like drivers that really count, I may not mention it. So in this case, Surtees retired with transmission issues.
Oh, that's not good for his day. Well, hang on. Was that his debut? Yeah, it was.
Yeah, his debut. And the rest, I guess.
Yes.
I'm just acknowledging there must have been a lot of retirements. Remember, 16 cars started, 6 are left. Right?
6 are left.
So the only thing of interest at this stage was the battle for third place, with an intense 3 laps in which Phil Hill passed both Graham Hill and Bruce McLaren to take third place. These drivers would remain nose to tail for the remainder of the race. So we're up to lap 60 now, and this is a 100-lap race. We've still got a decent amount of distance to go. Moss's car suddenly went on 3 cylinders, and he had to stop at the pit. This problem was found to be nothing more than a plug lead that had become detached, but the delay let Bonnier through into the lead.
Seriously, I know I sound like a broken record, but he has to be one of the unluckiest drivers I've ever heard or read about. Maybe apart from Charles Leclerc, especially at Monaco. But, yep, we have Bonnier in the lead, so go Bonnier.
Yeah, he's up there this year, isn't he?
Yeah.
It was not to last, though, as 8 laps later, Moss caught and repassed Bonnier.
Oh, no. Go Moss, yes.
He didn't deserve that issue anyway. At least his fate's going his way so far. In the meantime, the battle for third between Phil Hill and Graham Hill and Bruce McLaren was still raging, and it was lap 67 when McLaren repassed Phil Hill, only to spin at the Gasworks hairpin, which allowed Phil Hill to reclaim third. Graham Hill was also trying to take advantage of this situation, but by this time McLaren had fixed his issue, and try as he might, Graham Hill couldn't make it through. So much so that Graham Hill himself then spun in his efforts to try to catch and pass McLaren. So in quick succession, Von Trips and Ginther retired. Then on lap 83, one of the biggest retirements, Bonnier, presented at the pits with a broken rear suspension. So this left just 4 cars running at the end.
Okay, that is hilarious. And
it is.
And Monaco's the one that restricted teams from entering. So they only allowed 16 cars. So now they've only got 4.
I know. And those 8 drivers that didn't qualify,
I know.
Going, oh man, we could have been 5th.
We could have got a point.
Just kept it on the road. If we just kept it on the road. Yeah. So of these 4 cars that were left, only Phil Hill and McLaren were doing any actual racing. So it was at this point that championship points were at stake. So some of the retired cars suddenly reappeared.
What is going on? You have got to be joking. I mean, okay, It makes sense, but that is really funny. So that's what they meant by temporary. If we run out of cars, we just bring them back.
It's pretty funny. So you can see people like Jack Brabham, for example, was obviously watching the race, saw it go down to 4 cars. So he jumps back into his Cooper, which was and so technically he was instantly disqualified for receiving outside assistance. So I'm not sure where he and his Cooper were when he jumped into it. Was he just sitting on the side of the track away from the pits?
I don't know.
And maybe he got
maybe it was pushed back into the pits or okay.
I don't know, but he tried, right? He tried. He could see an opportunity. Bonnier also returned along with Gurney, who all limped around the track with Ginther. They all had damaged cars, remember? I think, didn't Bonnier have suspension failure?
Yes.
He wouldn't have been driving fast, And they all were limping around the track with Ginther and Ireland literally pushing their cars over the line.
Oh my gosh, this is hilarious. This is this is what happens when you just it feels like they've just made up the rule on the spot and they didn't realize what would happen.
They gave it a go.
Yeah. It is out of the box. It is very out of the box.
If there's no rules, then you're not breaking a rule until they create the rule to stop you doing what you're doing. So Brabham and Gurney were not classified as finishers as they had not completed apparently the required 50 laps, whilst Graham Hill and Von Trips were classified as they had completed 50 laps despite actually retiring.
Okay. I kind of understand, but that makes no sense.
Yeah.
That makes no sense to me.
Well, I'll give you the race results and this might paint the picture.
Okay.
So we may have forgotten all this, but Moss actually won the race.
Yay!
We haven't mentioned him for a while, but he actually did finish. It's funny when everyone else has got problems, that's when he's okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So McLaren came second. Bruce McLaren, 45 seconds back. Phil Hill came third, 10 seconds further back behind McLaren. Brooks was fourth, 1 lap behind. Bonnier was fifth, 17 laps behind. Ginther was sixth, 30 laps behind. So Ginther got a point.
Wow.
He retired with 30 laps to go, essentially.
That is funny.
He pushed his car over the line.
He pushed his car over the line. So he was one of the temporarily retired cars that came back.
Graham Hill was 7th, 34 laps behind, so he missed out on a point. So Ginther was the one who actually made it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Von Tripp's 39 and Ireland 44 laps behind.
Wow. Okay. And I also see that in the battle for second or third spot, McLaren set the fastest lap time, which would have been good enough for pole, but he actually only qualified with 11th.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So it shows how much he was in a zone in this race.
Yeah. Or, I don't know, did the track improve that much? I don't know. But a street circuit doesn't really have that, does it?
Well, it rained in the middle of the race.
It rained as well,
but it must have dried out for him to have done that when he was battling for second and third, I think.
And the other thing at the end of this race, and I think we said it at the beginning of the podcast, but Moss's Lotus was literally hanging by a thread. The engine,
of course, it was.
Yeah, like that's how Colin Chapman liked to build his cars, and I think that's where the nickname "the coffin on wheels" started because it was so fragile.
Oh wow!
So yeah, that's interesting.
Oh wow, interesting. Okay,
so the World Driver Championship standings are Bruce still in the lead on 14. Moss on 8, Cliff Allison on 6, and Phil Hill on 4. And then we have the Cooper Climax on 14, Ferrari on 10, the Lotus Climax on 9.
Okay.
Well, we might actually leave it there, Luigi, and come back and finish 1960 next week.
I think this will be at least a 3-parter, Rosa.
Okay.
So we won't finish, we'll continue.
We'll continue it. Okay.
Yeah, cool. Okay, bye everyone.
Bye. We have a Patreon.
Yay, we're a professional podcast now. So it means a lot to us if you are able to support the F1 Time Portal podcast.
For a small monthly fee, you not only get ad-free podcast content, you will also receive special episodes that are exclusively uploaded for our Patreon financial supporters.
We promise at least 2 additional exclusive episodes each month aligned to the decade we are up to in the show.
And you will also be able to make suggestions about any special episodes you may want us to research and present. We can't promise that we can do all of them, but we will consider them.
So, if that sounds like an entertainment bargain to you, go and sign up at patreon.com/F1 Time Portal today.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please tell your friends and non-F1 friends alike.
Yeah, and don't forget to rate us 5 stars or whatever highest is available on the podcast platform that you use.
We have a range of social media handles for you to connect with fellow listeners, so look up F1 Time Portal on all the usual platforms.
Or visit us at www.f1timeportal.com or email us at f1timeportal@gmail.com.
We would like to give credit to our primary reference materials, a series of books called Grand Prix by Mike Lang.
We also use many other written and digital references, which are in our show notes.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you.